Nightingale and Andrea, the two combat witches, were keeping watch outside, guarding the entrance of the cave, while the others went inside. Tilly carried Ashes on her back, while Macy, carrying Anna and Sylvie. They advanced deeper, guided by lightning. This was the decision Tilly made after thorough consideration. Although she felt somewhat uneasy, she had to know why the monster targeted the stone tower. This hole was deeper than she had expected, and the surrounding soil emitted a pungent smell. Up close, one could see the sticky liquid dripping from the surface of the mud. As the group ventured deeper, the light quickly faded, and the entire bottom of the cave, except for the faint light from a few torches, was plunged into darkness. At that moment, Sylvie quietly warned that the monster was just ahead. Strange sounds came from the depths of the cave, resembling crunching noises. The witches saw the tail of the beast. It crawled forward slowly, its writhing skin constantly secreting a pungent mucus. Tilly looked at Anna. Anna then summoned a sphere of black flame, which in a blink of an eye turned into a thin line flying straight toward the beast. This thin line pierced the creature's skin, releasing a billowing white fog. Even though Anna had explained her abilities before setting out, seeing them firsthand still made Tilly shocked. With the ability to move her consciousness freely, the black fire transformed into a thin line that was sharper than any sword. The beast let out a sharp wail, its body writhing crazily. It quickly shredded a good portion of its hefty body. Gradually, the monster ceased its struggles. Sylvie says that the monster's heart has stopped beating, but magic is still flowing in its body. No one recognizes what kind of demonic beast this is. After Anna's burning, the smell is not as strong as before. They observed under Sylvie's guidance. They quickly found the stone tower, now reduced to mere rubble, but the crystal coffin did not have any trace of corrosion on it. Tilly glanced at Anna, who nodded in acknowledgement, stretching the black fire into a thin thread and gently pressing it onto the crystal coffin. It began to slowly cut through the crystal, and several cracks formed on the crystal. Almost simultaneously, Savvy summoned an invisible barrier, protecting the witches within. Ice shards shot out, revealing the inner core. Suddenly, everyone felt a gust of icy cold, the temperature around them plummeting sharply. Under the burning of the black flames, the ice crystal melted even faster. When all the ice crystals were completely melted, the woman sealed within revealed herself. She seemed to still be lost in deep slumber, falling into Ash's arms. Ashes could still feel the woman's faint heartbeat. Tilly couldn't believe it. The woman had survived in the extremely low temperature of the ice crystal, confirming that she was a witch. As for who she was, they would have to wait until they returned to the border town for a thorough inquiry. Andrea stood somewhat bored next to the hollow entrance, the passage of time seemingly slowing down. She originally came from an upper noble family. She had been taught that elegance and restraint were essential qualities for an unmarried lady. But Andrea was indecisive about initiating a conversation. She remembered a rumor that Nightingale had once fought Ashes in a duel. She pondered that if she were to gather information about an old opponent, it wouldn't count as initiating a conversation. Turning around and lifting her head, she was shocked to find that Nightingale was gone. Shortly after, she heard the faint sound of footsteps. However, when she looked up, there was nothing but snow on the ground without a single figure in sight. The footstep sounds quickly drew closer, and suddenly, she realized that the enemy was invisible. Just as she was about to sound an alarm, a roaring noise suddenly erupted next to her ear. A bizarrely shaped monster appeared, looking like a mutated mantis. Nightingale shattered its skull with her dual pistols. Andrea bit her lip, she had been too careless. She summoned her magic longbow, but she didn't know where to aim. Nightingale fired a few more shots, and one by one, the monsters fell. Andrea asked Nightingale when she had noticed them. Nightingale replied that she had noticed them when they first appeared because they had magic in them. This was the first time Andrea had heard that demonic beasts also possessed magic. Nightingale pondered and said, maybe they're hybrids. Soon, the witches who had ventured deep into the cave returned to the surface. The hot air balloon quickly inflated and ascended, starting to move in the direction of the town. On the balloon, they discussed the demonic beasts they had just encountered. Just then, Sylvie let out a gasp of surprise. She looked down, and Andrea leaned over to see, but she saw nothing. On closer inspection, the corpses of the monsters that were lying on the ground were suddenly missing half their bodies. There were countless footprints in the snow. Nightingale casually remarked, probably hundreds of them, all running towards the cave. Maybe they want to have a feast. While Nightingale thought this had nothing to do with them anymore, Tilly was growing increasingly uneasy. In the northern part of the town, Carter was giving a speech to the latest formed department, the police department. Their mission was to catch criminals, combat illegal activities, protect citizens, and maintain order in the territory. Carter would lead them on their first mission, and everyone orderly followed their chief knight. Wade couldn't believe that he had passed the assessment, completed the comprehensive training, and became a member of this new department. Recalling when the city hall official came to inform him, he still remembered the question on the initial written test, reportedly created by Prince Roland himself: if you were a coachman driving a carriage carrying 2 civilians on a narrow mountain road and suddenly a group of refugees appeared in front of you. Unable to swerve, your only choices are to hit them or let the carriage fall off the cliff. The first option would cause many refugee deaths, the second would cause the death of 2 civilians. But as a coachman, he could survive thanks to his skills. What would he choose? Wade didn't know the right answer, but he wrote a comprehensive paragraph explaining his choice. He was delighted to be a policeman, earning a stable salary. Soon, the group arrived at the docks where refugees from different places were gathered. Prince Roland, wanting to ensure they safely survived the winter, had sent people to bring them to border town. Their first task was to assist the city hall in maintaining order, ensuring these people lined up one by one to go through the inspection checkpoints for quarantine and registration. It sounded straightforward, a process that Wade had experienced himself just a month earlier. Suddenly, there was a disturbance behind them. Wade turned around to see a man in a fur robe, escorted by several guards, approaching the dock area. Everyone recognized him immediately. It was the Lord of Border Town, Prince Roland. Wade hadn't expected the prince to personally inspect the refugees. Suddenly, a man claiming to be from the north and skilled at farming was registering. Wade noticed the refugee glanced in Prince Roland's direction without a hint of respect in his eyes. As the staff member was about to let him pass, Wade subconsciously told him to stop. He asked the man which month during winter should he seed the wheat. Upon hearing the question, the city hall official looked at Wade impatiently, saying they were only doing the registration process right now. The refugee didn't answer Wade's question, but Wade examined the man's clothing. If he were from the north, such attire would have frozen him, and he wasn't even wearing gloves. His accent wasn't northern either. Wade grabbed his right hand, and the staff member also caught on something was wrong. They both asked who the man was, and suddenly, the man pulled out a red pill from his pocket and swallowed it. His muscles expanded instantly, and his body reddened. He violently threw Wade to the ground. Wade fell hard, his unhealed back injury flaring up in painful bursts. Suddenly, 4 or 5 more people broke from the crowd, heading straight for Prince Roland. Wade yelled a warning to the prince. Roland merely looked at the rampaged man coldly. Soon, Wade heard a series of thudding sounds, and the head of the man who had thrown him exploded into a spray of blood in the ensuing cloud of smoke. The others who had attacked Roland also fell. The strange men who rushed out of the crowd were all eliminated, and the sudden incident caused a wave of panic among the refugees. The scene was filled with continuous screams, gradually becoming uncontrollable. At this moment, Prince Roland's resounding voice suddenly echoed over the crowd. The guards and soldiers gathered around. Echo used her ability to allow everyone to hear Roland's voice. Everyone, including Wade, could hear a clear, calm speech as if the speaker were whispering right into their ears. The crowd suddenly fell silent. Roland declared that he was the Lord of Border Town and that Border Town would provide everyone with food and shelter from the dreaded winter. Everyone will have food to fill their stomachs, a roof above their heads, and many jobs with great salaries. The houses were all solid huts, with stoves under the beds, so even in winter, wearing just a single layer of clothes in their homes, they will still feel warm. The food supplied will be soup and porridge with delicious dried meat every day. Hearing this, the children started to salivate. As Wade listened to this speech, he noticed that the prince, unlike most nobles, did not emphasize his power and the duties of his citizens. He didn't proclaim that everyone under his rule must obey his will. Instead, from the perspective that concerned the people the most, he described his promise through the provision of food and shelter. Seeing the yearning expressions on the faces of the refugees at the dock, it was evident that his words were undoubtedly more touching to their hearts. Roland continued, expressing his hope that all his citizens could lead a good life, but the enemies hidden in the dark did not want this. The ones who rushed out like beasts just now were undoubtedly sent by them. Wade realized that the panic had dissipated. When those abnormal assassins were seen as a common enemy, the refugees' anxiety and worry gradually turned into anger towards the perpetrators who had attempted to harm the prince. They are the villains who wanted to ruin their good life. Such people should not be forgiven. Carter suddenly came over and told Wade that the prince wanted to see him. Roland praised Wade's observational skills and inquired about his previous identity. Wade honestly replied that he had served in the patrol squad in Golden Harvest City until it was attacked by a large number of pirates. The prince looked at Wade's information, which didn't include this. Roland asked why he had hidden it. Wade hesitated for a moment but eventually told his story. He owed his life to an old man named Kakosim, and he couldn't abandon him. After knowing the ins and outs, Roland nodded and then proceeded to ask for more information about Wade and Kakosim. Wade wondered why the prince asked if he and Kakosim had any family members, but he answered truthfully nonetheless. After knowing both of them had lost all of their family members, Roland told Wade that anyone with special skills could be given priority to rent a residence in the inner town and enjoy all the rights of the citizens. This naturally included their family members. Wade was stunned for a moment, then heard Roland ask him if he understood what he meant. Wade suppressed his excitement, knelt again, and thanked Roland. Roland, not a fan of people kneeling, quickly asked Carter to help him up. As Wade bowed and left, Roland told Wade to continue his hard work, for his own sake and Kakosim's. What he had always been worried about finally had a resolution, and Wade felt a lot lighter. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly remembered the written test. He couldn't help but ask the prince about the question from the written test. Why did Roland choose him? Roland explained that there was no correct answer to the test. It was to assess the literacy level and writing skills of the applicants. As long as they could understand the question and express their thoughts, the test would be considered passed. After Wade left, Carter whispered and said that he had learned about the situation of the assassins. Turns out, because there were not enough boats, the news was inadvertently leaked when the envoy tried to hire new boats from his friend. After Timothy found out, he had his people join the refugees and come to the Western Territory. Timothy did not dare to attack Border Town, but it was clear that he wanted to take revenge on Roland. Luckily, these assassins only carried pills instead of gunpowder. Roland instructed Carter to keep a stricter watch in the future, to ensure the safety of the other refugees, and not to let any assassins slip through. He would assign Nightingale and Sylvie to assist them. Leaf suddenly rushed in. She excitedly said, "Everyone's back." Roland stood up abruptly and followed her quickly to the backyard. A huge hot air balloon was slowly descending. As soon as the basket touched the ground, Anna jumped down. Roland opened his arms to welcome her, and she greeted him with a smile and a light hug. Lightning and Macy rushed over too. Roland simply stood in place, letting everyone including Wendy and Nightingale hug him in turn. Tilly looked at this scene and smiled, commenting on how harmonious Roland was with everyone. Roland laughed and asked if she wanted a hug from her brother. She chuckled and shook her head, saying she still remembered when Roland picked her up and dropped her on the ground. Roland could only shrug in innocence, then turned his gaze to the woman in Ash's arms. Nightingale mentioned that the woman's magic power was completely drained and would take several days to recover. Roland ordered a room to be cleared for her and asked everyone to tell him what had happened during their journey. After hearing Tilly and Nightingale's recounts, Roland couldn't help but feel a cold sweat. Despite all of the witch's abilities, pursuing a gigantic demonic beast they had never seen before deep underground was still a very dangerous task. Tilly had a new theory. She noticed that the burrowing maggot kept drilling into the demon's territory. She speculated that there was a hierarchical relationship between the demons and the demonic beasts, similar to the one between humans and dogs. However, there was still an enigma that Roland couldn't understand. The demonic beasts only launched attacks on human settlements during the months of demons. If it was because the demons, due to the red mist, could not quickly occupy the entire wilderness and completely drive humans off the continent, they could have constantly sent demonic beasts to harass the four kingdoms. Why would they wait until winter to take action? Furthermore, some hybrid species showed high intelligence. Tilly sighed, expressing her worry about the invisible demonic beasts they encountered. These mantis-like beasts could hide their forms during the day, move stealthily, and were almost impossible to guard against. She realized that they knew very little about the demonic beasts. Roland felt relieved that these invisible mantises had not appeared in the western region. Otherwise, if several of these arrived each winter, the Changgu stronghold would have been reduced to ruins long ago. Tilly knew that the longer the months of demons lasted, the stronger the demonic beasts became. Given that it began to snow in the autumn this time, they might face very dangerous enemies. Now, they could only rely on Nightingale and Sylvie to monitor the defensive line. After the discussion ended, Roland headed towards the blue-haired witch's room with Scroll. Scroll hesitated, believing that the woman could potentially be an enemy since they had not confirmed her identity yet. Roland understood this, so he temporarily put a god's stone of punishment on the witch. He sighed, hoping the witch would not misunderstand them. As they entered the room, only Anna was left taking care of the woman. The blue-haired witch hadn't woken up yet. Nanawa and Lily had both came, but there was no reaction. A guard shouted, "Master, the city wall has been breached, the coalition army won't hold for much longer. We need to leave now." The woman could already hear the sounds of battle outside. The overcast sky was revealing a dull red light as if enveloped in viscous blood. More soldiers were dying, and multiple different demons appeared on the battlefield, slaughtering the coalition. After a volley of spears, dozens lay in pools of blood, their painful screams filling the battlefield. A nearby guard tightly grabbed the woman, trying to prevent her from risking her life. The woman asserted she could fight. Her magic surged, exuding an icy aura that shook off the guard's hand. Without looking back, she strode forward. As a member of the Holy City's witches, if she had to die, she would die on the battlefield. Just then, a clear rebuke came from the side of the battlefield. A person fell from the sky, appearing like a deity descending. She raised her long sword high. Her auburn hair, like fire, instantly ignited hope in everyone's heart. The blessed warrior of the Federation, the transcendent witch Acaris. Amidst the people's surprise, Acaris raised her heavy sword and swung it at the oncoming demons. At that moment, it seemed as if time had stopped, with the light appearing like the last shadows before dawn. When she opened her eyes again, all the demons had been slain. Acaris seemed to have exhausted all her strength. She kneeled on one knee, telling everyone else to go first. Someone in the crowd asked, "Where should we go?" Tears streamed down the blue-haired woman's face. Where should they go indeed? Even the last holy city had fallen under the attack of the demons. Tens of thousands had died, all their measures exhausted, yet they could not turn the tide of the battle. Acaris, summoning all her strength, stood up. She raised her huge sword, her voice resonating across the battlefield. She steadfastly told everyone not to give up hope, that they needed to cross the mountains and rivers and head to the wilderness to rebuild their home. People slowly left the city, prepared to go to this new land to survive. The blue-haired woman looked at the holy city. What had once been the most luxurious of cities was now plunged into chaos and disorder. She didn't know if continuous escape could change anything, but she took her party away from the crowd and hurriedly moved west. The experimental tower in the forest held critical magic stones and documents she had left behind. Behind them, a group of demons suddenly appeared. Apart from her guards, the rest had no combat power. A few knights heroically covered for them. From the initial dozens of people, only 3 remained. Her trusty chief guards didn't flee. It was a common belief in the holy city that witches were chosen by the gods, and those without magic were merely the soil to cultivate them. However, the chief guard and those who protected her, she saw courage and resilience. Under the protection of the chief guard, the woman finally arrived at the stone tower. She entered the secret chamber and found the red magic stone. Suddenly, the roar of demons came from outside the door. The woman knew she couldn't die here. She needed to take all her research results out. She injected magic into the magic stone, causing it to continuously emit a signal crying for help. She invoked all her magic, transforming it into a gush of frost. The demon lifted its spear, its arm rapidly expanding. The next moment, the coldly gleaming spearhead flew straight at her. She sealed herself away. She didn't know how long it had been. Her vision turned pitch black, and all sound disappeared. Her body no longer felt cold, as if she was wrapped in a bundle of soft velvet. It felt like she was not in a dark basement, but lying on a soft bed. The pain of being about to be pierced did not come for a long time. She tried to slowly open her eyes and suddenly heard a woman's voice, saying, "Your Highness, she's awake." She casting her gaze to her side, only to see a man enter her field of vision. Roland asked her how she was feeling, but the woman didn't answer. Instead, she asked where she was. Roland gently replied, "This is Border Town," and then introduced himself and the Witch Union. She tried to get out of bed but found herself completely weak. The woman was thinking, things were moving in a direction she didn't want to see. The Witch Union, Prince of Grey Castle, Border Town, what exactly had happened? Looking at the 3 witches in the room, she was happy to see her kind, but they all seemed to be subordinates of the man who called himself a prince. She took a moment to recall, her eyes wide in disbelief. The title prince was a very old title, a secular title from the time of the first divine battle 400 years ago. She thought she had gone back in time, that the gods had given her a second chance to prepare and save the holy city and its people. Everyone in the room stared at the woman, but she didn't answer Roland's question. Roland thought the woman was just tired and wanted to let her rest for the night. She suddenly sat up and asked, "What happened to the demons? What happened to Takira?" After a series of questions, everyone in the room showed expressions of joy and excitement. Wendy asked her if she was really from 450 years ago. Rather than answering Roland, she was more willing to answer this witch. She said her name was Agatha, a witch from the Exploration Society of Takira. But she was surprised to hear Wendy ask her if she was a witch from 450 years ago. She wondered if they'd been fighting the demons for 450 years after she had fallen asleep. At this point, Roland told her that she had been asleep for a long time and the world had changed a lot. He could tell her slowly. But the woman ordered Roland to tell her now with a commanding tone. Agatha thought the prince was extremely rude. How could a mortal be so presumptuous to sit by her side and talk to her? But she needed to know what had happened. Roland smiled, and wasn't angry at Agatha's rudeness. Roland began to explain the history of Grey Castle and the 4 kingdoms. When Agatha heard that self-proclaimed kings and nobles had become rulers stepping on the heads of witches, she couldn't help but interrupt him. How could witches possibly be hunted? Who would have the audacity to do such a thing? In her anger, Agatha wanted to stretch out her hand and teach this nonsense-talking man a lesson, but she found that her magic power could not be converted into frost as usual. It was then that she realized that there was a metal ring on her ankle, and it actually had a god's stone of punishment. She looked incredulously at the witches in the room, angrily scolding, how could they violate the Witch Federation's order to use this banned item? Roland sighed, he was afraid this would happen. Wendy sat on the edge of the bed, pulled the blanket back over her, and gently explained to her that what the prince said was true and that Takira no longer existed. The organizations she mentioned were also unknown to them. It was Prince Roland who had saved the witches, provided them with a safe place to live, and was researching how to better use their abilities to transform the world and live freely like ordinary people. After listening to Wendy's account, Agatha was completely silent. The Federation was a large organization established by several witch kingdoms. They won the first divine battle and were responsible for training and dispatching witches. Such a powerful organization, and now there were people who hadn't heard of them. The woman thought to herself, where have Acarus and the others gone? She couldn't believe that in the world now, witches could be enslaved and hunted. Wendy seemed to notice her discomfort and brought her a warm drink. Although everyone was kind to her, Agatha didn't understand why a group of witches were vigilant and guarded against her, even restraining her with a godstone of punishment. She sighed. She knew she had to gain their trust first, so she shared her story. When Roland heard that Agatha had fought against the demons, Roland was somewhat surprised. Agatha frowned, looking annoyed at Roland. This unreasonable man had interrupted her again and asked even more questions. Scroll asked Agatha if she was a witch of the church, and Agatha impatiently replied that she had never heard of the church. Roland asked Scroll to hand that diary to Agatha. Agatha said that the text was created by the Federation so that ordinary people couldn't understand it and wouldn't be able to get involved in upper-level affairs. But the witches could understand it simply by using their magic. Roland commented that text and language are tools for communication, and doing so was indeed foolish. Agatha was so angry. If it were not for her inability to use her powers, she would definitely teach Roland a lesson. He was too impolite. She was not used to ordinary people pointing fingers in front of her. Scroll asked Agatha again if she recognized the name Acarus, and Agatha's hand trembled slightly as she asked Scroll where she had heard the name. Upon hearing Scroll's response, Agatha hurriedly turned to the last page, sighed deeply, and remained silent for a long time. The image of a woman holding a long sword and slaying all the demons surfaced in her mind again. She said Acarus was a queen, one of the 3 seats of the Federation. She was a high-ranking transcendent witch, which means she was above the extraordinary witches. Even among the many blessed warriors in the Federation, she was the most powerful one. No one in the room had heard of these terms. Agatha closed the diary and explained that a witch's powers keep increasing from the moment of their awakening and solidify on their coming-of-age day. However, this is not the end point of their power. Through their understanding, feelings, and practice, a very small number of lucky ones can advance further, which the Federation calls high-order awakening. Roland thought for a moment and understood what Agatha meant. She meant witches have the ability to evolve their skills. Roland counted his fingers and said that 4 witches in the Witch Union had evolved their abilities now. This statement almost choked Agatha. She asked how many people were in the Witch Union, and Wendy said there were about a dozen. Agatha seemed somewhat annoyed. It was impossible that 4 people out of a dozen could awaken to a high order. She thought that Roland and the others were speaking nonsense because they didn't understand. The prince saw her disbelief and called Anna over. Agatha looked at the beautiful and calm girl, but she was still too young, and it was impossible for her to achieve a high-order awakening. She sees an orange flame appear in Anna's palm. Agatha quickly evaluated it. This is a fire-based magic ability, rare but not special. As soon as the words were spoken, the flame suddenly dimmed and turned into a wisp of gloomy green flame. Roland explained that this was her ability solidified at becoming of age. Soon, Agatha saw an incredible scene. The green flame disappeared, replaced by a black cube. It no longer looked like a flame, but more like a lightless metal cube. Its sides were smooth and flat, with distinct edges and corners, standing quietly in the witch's hand.